Obviously, historians can bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to a historical field. However, that doesn't always mean that what they say is correct, or that what they say is always at the forefront of that historical area. Hello, my name is Adam. I'm an ancient Greek reenactor and experimental archaeologist, and today I wanted to talk about a subject which may be a little bit peculiar about what historians get wrong about history. And as someone who has sort of a different, more practical lens to history, just sort of want to talk about something which I think many historians miss when they talk about history, and in this case, in particular, military history. There's been a few times where I've been watching a video that I've been thoroughly enjoying on maybe History Hit or another one of those channels about an expert talking about a specific field that they're obviously quite knowledgeable in, and then they'll hit you with something that I'm like, that's very much not correct, and that's sort of obvious that you have no personal experience with this. And this is something where I think historians have to be very, very careful. Obviously, as a historian, they have the background to be a credible source. They should be educated in the subject that they're obviously an expert in, and generally speaking, they should be able to give you some very good information on that field as well. However, sometimes they really don't. And I know there's other channels on here that talk about sort of political biases. That's not what I'm interested in today. I'm interested more in that sort of practical field that lots of historians don't have, and lots of reenactors do. And I think we often see this sort of clashing of some historians very much don't like reenactment. They view it as people that play dress up and try and say that their finds mean something. And other historians do take it very seriously. And some historians are also reenactors themselves, which I think is absolutely great. Why is reenacting important? And I think that's a very fair question to ask, and hopefully I can give you some answers to that. Reenactment is all about trying to be as authentic as we can to recreate the material goods of the past, and that's also including the food that they ate, the shoes that they walked in, and the clothing that they wear, and sort of the living conditions that they were in on campaign as well. There's sort of a saying which you can never truly know a man until you walk a mile in his shoes, and I think that's very true from the shoes that they wore, the food that they ate, and sort of the way that they did things. Reenactment can be a really, really good tool to give you sort of as close as you can to actual time travel, in that sense of actually going, back a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years to, obviously we can't be perfect, but to try and give some what it was like to stand in their shoes experience that lots of historians don't have by studying these sources. And I think that together, reenactment or experimental archaeology and all these other living history sort of terms and academia working together is really, really good. And you have certain historians which do that. For instance, Tobias Capwell, Roel Knijdijk. You have these other historians, Benny Trusker, a friend of the channel, you know him as well, who sort of do take value in that reenactment lens. And I think that's really, really important. Then you get some historians which comment on areas which they have otherwise been very knowledgeable in, but clearly don't understand the arms and armour aspect of these military histories. So for instance, recently-ish, a video from History Hit where Matt ranked medieval helmets, he made some comments which are just very obvious that he's never worn these helmets before. And I think that we have to be careful as someone who has that credible background that you don't spread more misinformation. And just because you're a historian in a particular time period doesn't mean that you can give an answer to everything evolving that particular time period, especially military equipment if you have no experience using it. And I think that's something that we often see, historians giving sort of opinions on armour that they have no practical experience with. They haven't really talked to anyone who's actually worn it. They just go by the I think this would be the case, or it would be very hard to see in this helmet, it's really heavy, this doesn't offer any protection, as opposed to realising that actually wearing it is completely the opposite. We even see this in the comment section of certain videos. I love and encourage you guys to ask questions, and I try and answer as many as I can, but some people sort of suggest things in videos where it's quite clear they don't necessarily have the practical experience of wearing armour, which is great. That's why asking questions is a really important thing, because it can give someone who has had the opportunity to wear this style of armour to answer that question and give you a little bit more insight that maybe you didn't have before. For instance, armour being scorching hot like a car in the sun, which really isn't correct. If you've ever worn armour out in say Greece, for example, Greece is very hot to begin with, but when you're actually wearing the armour in that temperature, it doesn't cook you. It gets maybe warm to the touch, but it sort of helps as a temperature regulator. The heat sort of sucks the heat out of you and radiates it back to the atmosphere, unlike a car, which does seem to absorb it. So there's sort of that aspect to it, of this armour being incredibly hot. There's also the attitude that lots of historians have of, oh, this armour is incredibly heavy and movement impeding, but you've never worn it before. There's very, very few other areas in life that we really can give answers to that we don't know or have any experience with. So let me try and put this into an analogy here. It'd be like me saying that the steering on a particular car is bad because it's a big car and it can go really fast, so the steering and handling is not great. Well, how can I tell you that if I've never driven that car before? You might be incredibly wrong, you could be correct, or you could have, you know, a little bit of both in there. And I think that's sort of a similar sort of thing of, you may look at armour and think something, you may look at a car and think something, and it be actually incredibly, incredibly different. So reenactment and that living history sort of style of, you know, being a living historian, I guess you could say, can give you some really good insights on the personal level of history. You know, what is it like to be an individual in a historical time period, which other historians may not be as interested in. They may be more interested in the overarching era that they're talking about, and a historian can be an absolutely great asset, of course, for educating you on that overall overarching sort of era of history. I think where the scholarly approach has a few gaps that thankfully reenactment and experimental archaeology and all of those other terms sort of picks up, is giving that sort of first-hand individualistic experience and expertise on, well, you may interpret this source as meaning this. We've practically tested this with as authentic kit as we possibly can and found that this doesn't work very well. So we think that the term that would likely encapsulate this style of combat would be this instead. For instance, you get lots of people speculating, for instance, a transverse crest. As you can see, I believe this helmet over here, you can just see in the frame there, has a transverse crest. I had someone telling me that transverse crests were really impractical because they blocked the vision of people in the phalanx. I've worn a transverse crest for many years in the phalanx. I've been in a phalanx with other people with transverse crests, and they've never once blocked your vision before. So you sort of have, you know, that's just an example of a pretty minor thing. But people like to sort of say things about armour when they don't necessarily have the practical experience or have spoken to someone to make that accusation. I hope that you sort of understand why that is, you know, can be dangerous in some cases, or just spread some misinformation, because you're talking about something that you don't necessarily actually know the answer to. And that same sort of guesswork is done by historians in this same field. Obviously there's flaws in reenactment. You can't use reenactment to justify everything, the same way that you can't use a scholarly approach to justify everything. I think in a perfect world, you would sort of use both, and thankfully historians do that, it's just not all of them do. And I just think for historians out there, if any of you happen to be watching the channel, I think next time you go to comment about something, especially military history-wise, that you don't necessarily have any practical experience with, maybe just either don't comment on it or don't give a concrete answer. Maybe use these sort of, I've never worn one of these before, but looking at it, I might think that this would be the case, or that this might be the case. But make sure that people know that you don't have any experience wearing it. And I think obviously when we're talking about these levels of armaments, that people go, oh, I would have changed this. Do you really think that the hundreds of years of military history that they use this style of armour, no one thought about that before? Just because someone's an expert in a field doesn't mean that they can give you details regarding every single thing in that field. The same way that you guys ask me questions about military history, ancient military history, that I can't answer for you as well. So just because someone is an expert, obviously they're very, very knowledgeable in a certain subject, they might be lacking some information in another, and I just think that it's their responsibility, it's our responsibility to be open and honest in our answers when we answer questions or make speculative guesses about whatever part of history we're talking about, that we don't necessarily know, or that we don't have the practical experience to justify it, which is completely okay. That's why you should ask questions, that's why we should give an honest answer to them. And when we say that we don't know, say that we don't know. If we have an idea, say that it's an idea. If we have practical experience, say that through our practical experience it's been the case. I don't think we should make concrete statements. I think the more and more that you look at history, the more that you realise there really are no concrete answers. So does reenactment have all the answers? No. Does the sort of scholarly approach have all the answers? No. I think that they sort of can give different, very valuable assets that they can both bring to the table to work off of each other. And I think that historians should be more careful about making these sort of blanket statements which are sort of spreading misinformation. I'm sure most of them don't intend to spread misinformation. After all, they obviously have an interest in this field if they have gone through that level of schooling and sort of teaching that they have. But many of them still do make comments regarding this. And I do think that it can be potentially dangerous depending on what it is that they're spreading the misinformation on. If you don't know about it, maybe don't comment on it. Thank you very much for watching this little video. I hope that you thought about what I had to say here. It's not meant to be a dig at anyone in particular, just a little bit of food for thought. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.